welcome to TUC0's Talks. TUC0's Talks is a leadership podcast where we talk to military leaders and to athletic coaches to try to figure out how do we take care of people and how do we learn and fail forward. Well, I do want to thank Moray Classical Schools for partnering with us. Moray Classical Schools is a private Christian classical school specifically tailored for military kids. If you do not know about Moray Classical Schools, I highly recommend you go to morayclassical.org and learn more about them. Well, today we're joined by Dr. Temple. He's a military expert who will discuss leadership and the importance of understanding intent and communication. He'll highlight the role of the non-commissioned officer in the military and their ability to make decisions on the battlefield. He shares his experience in working with senior leaders and how he learned to think for them by observing their language and communication style. Additionally, Dr. Temple discusses his involvement in veterans issues and local government, emphasizing the importance of lifelong learning and self-reflection. Well, make sure that you like and subscribe and get ready to check in with TUC0's Talks. Hello and welcome to TUC0's Talks. Today is another day of interviews and we have a very special guest, a very good friend of mine and someone that I look up to because of his expertise and what he brings to the fight. So Dr. Temple is in the military and we all know him as Brandon, but Dr. Temple is an expert at getting to know high-level leaders and getting to know exactly what they need. So this is going to be a fun conversation and something that everyone is going to learn from. So Dr. Temple, how are we doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here. It's good to see you.
Man, it's good to see you too. It's been a while. I love these because it's just an opportunity to get back and talk with people that I haven't talked with in a while and just to get to ping them for information. So why don't you take a couple seconds and tell everybody who you are, where you're from?
Yeah, so I'm from California originally. I've been in the military now, coming up on 24 years. I spent the first half of that enlisted, so I was enlisted about 10 years, and then commissioned. I'm a tactical air control party officer. However, right now I'm serving on my follow-on tour from my legislative fellowship. I was legislative fellow for my intermediate developmental education. I was assigned to a member of Congress as national security advisor. And now I'm on the backside of that where you do your mandatory follow-on assignment with the Air Force. So I'm an Air Force legislative liaison, working in the reports and correspondence branch. So I'm really responsible for digesting all of the thousands of pages of legislative text each year in the National Defense Authorization Act and the appropriations bills, and pulling out all the Air Force and Space Force requirements, getting those tasked out and managing that process to get all that information back to Congress. So that's what I'm working on professionally within the military right now.
That's crazy. That's a lot of work, a lot of staff work, and man, they have the perfect person for that. Well, let's jump right into it. This is obviously a leadership podcast, and we try to work for those young leaders. Think about your favorite leader and what were those characteristic or leaders, or think about that characteristic that they had. Who's that?
Well, right now, I'd be remiss if I didn't name names. And for me, it was Master Sergeant Matt Papa Bear Del Vecchio, who we recently lost. He passed away in December.
Yeah.
So hard to lose your first leader. He was my first boss, essentially my first non-commissioned officer in charge when I came into the military, my first duty station. So somebody who had me right as an 18-year-old, fresh off the street, just this amorphous ball of clay that had potential but was immature and needed molding. And I mean, I give him all the credit for my start and getting me on a path for success. And some of the reasons why he was great is he saw potential in everybody. He can pull out those little pieces of potential in everybody. We all have different skill sets, different strengths, different weaknesses. And he was a master at getting those particular parts out of you and then meshing it in to get into the larger group. So you're talking about a flight or, a platoon, any type of military formation, or in a civilian organization, any type of team, and he would work all those together to get the mission accomplished. He was tough, and he challenged you. And you got to keep in mind as well, this is 2000, so not exactly old school, Vietnam era, whatever. It's always this generation who says the last generation was harder, right? But he still is one of those Gulf War vets, a little bit different time in the military, still very much, do as you're told type of mentality across the military, not just in him. And he had a little bit of that in him, but he'd also try to give you the why behind that, which is really at the time was out of the norm. You didn't get a lot of was like, go sweep this, go do this, go train on that, go do that, right? It was just go do. Mind you, I'm 18, so we needed a lot of that at the time, us young guys. And but he was quick to praise you when you met the challenge that he gave you, and would guide you along that path. I'd say the biggest lesson that I took from him, and we're going to talk about this later as I was preparing for this, but he had the master skill to navigate that area between being your boss, but also treating you as family, and being able to disconnect from that boss relationship and be more friendly and open with you without going over to the, hey, I just want to be popular and with the guy, and you can get into that side too far and you lose credibility. And he knew how to navigate that scene so well that we all knew that if we were out at his house, all the guys, this is an all male unit at the time, so the guys are at his house, that we can be friendly with him in a more familiar terms. But once he got back in the office, we all knew there was a switch, and he became Sergeant Del Vecchio again, and that it was an understood thing, but he just knew how to navigate that so well, where it never felt odd, it never felt out of place, and you really felt like you were part of his team, but also part of his family. And I mean, like I said, I owe him so much, and it was just such. I mean, I know coming in at 18 that I needed a lot of forming to get some military bearing. I was very immature, class clown type, and he was the perfect leader at the perfect place, at the perfect time for me to get me on track. And there's been lots of leaders after that who have built upon that. I'm not where I'm at today without several of those leaders. There's really too many to name, but I really did want to highlight Del right off the bat, and as that first point of entry into the military, because again, just to pay him a little tribute and honor him and his legacy, but because he was so formative on my early upbringing.
No, and I appreciate you bringing him in. And when you think about the leaders you've been around, like 4 stars, congressional, all those, and I say, who's the leader? And you say the master sergeant. Like, I think people outside the military would be like, well, how's that possible? And in the military, everybody's like, nope, that's about right. And so those senior NCOs that lead down so well and can tell you what to do, yet at a time can separate their rank and be personable and family oriented, yet turn right around and tell a lieutenant colonel to pound sand because he's hammering down on a sergeant. Like, that's the leadership that is so incredibly challenging. And so I was talking with Sergeant. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, I put this out anywhere I can to anybody who will listen about the American military and about why we're successful. And that it is because I believe wholeheartedly that our NCO Corps is the backbone of our military. And it is why we are so strong and that we're able to win wars. I fully believe that. When I was briefing my member of Congress I was in that office right as the Ukraine war was starting. And all the predictions were that Russia was just going to roll in and destroy the Ukrainians and be in Kyiv within a matter of days, essentially. And as we saw that wasn't happening, some of the discussions we were having is why weren't they able to do that? And there's many reasons for that. But one of the things that I did brief my member of Congress on was, militaries in authoritarian regimes like Russia, China, or even past foes like Iraq under Saddam, they don't invest in their non-commissioned officers. They have a brittle decision-making chain that is very leader-centric up at the top.
Right.
Nobody feels like they can make those decisions in the moment. That disciplined initiative that we give our NCOs to lead and make decisions on the battlefield and in our day-to-day jobs. And I wholeheartedly believe that that is one variable in the reason why Russia was unsuccessful in their initial invasion of Ukraine. And I believe that that is a huge strength we have over any adversary that we may face, is that we do invest in that time, and our NCO Corps is ready to make those decisions that other militaries just can't.
Yeah, yeah. And the leadership and the trust of our senior NCOs to allow them to make decisions and mistakes, and then to back them up and to work through that. Yeah, it is a formidable force in the way it's organized and the way it's trained, to be able to work through that. And that brings me to a great question that I'd love to get your insight on. There's always two sides, always. Now there could be multiple. It could be 3, 4, 5, 6 different sides. Your job as a leader is to listen to all those different things going on, and then to be able to make a decision. How, as a leader, do you make a decision on what you think is right with all those inputs coming in?
The first thing I always start with is you have to know what the intent is of what you're trying to do. Like, what is the objective you're trying to reach? What is the end state that you're looking for? What is it that you are making a decision about? And what are, typically when we're making decisions, especially in any organization, it's coming from above you. Everybody in the United States government, except the president, has a boss. Same thing in a company, right? Everybody but the CEO has a boss, and even the CEO typically are answerable to a board or whoever. So there's always somebody who has an intent for you and some sort of objective or thing to accomplish. And if you miss that understanding of what the outcome is or what the intent is, then all the discussions that are flying around before that are just lost, because you're just floating in space. You have to have at least a direction of where this is what we're trying to achieve here, or I believe this is the outcome that we're trying to achieve. Now, given that intent, let's start talking about the information. And that at that point, it just becomes a discussion amongst stakeholders to sift through all the different inputs, the different variables, and figure out what the best course is to reach that objective. But if you miss that intent up front, you can go way off course and find yourself in a bad spot.
Yeah. No, and I think in the military, we talk about intent a lot. Hey, here's the commander's intent. And that does allow us to make really good decisions because we understand that. I think in the civilian side, intent is lost very quickly. I don't know about the political side, but in schools, in basic leadership, it's thrown around what the commander wants. And what the leader wants, the CEO, the principal, the head of school, whatever it is, but it's not delivered especially well. When you're delivering an intent as a leader and you're going to deliver an intent, how do you get that information out so people know clearly what you're looking for?
Well, multiple forms of communication, especially today, we use all sorts of forms, right? I like to have discussions with folks. I might put out something initially, and if we're going to set up a meeting, it needs to be a clear, concise reason why we're meeting. I don't believe in wasting people's times with unnecessary meetings where we're not there actually to focus on an agenda and come up with outputs. But once you're in the room, that's when you have the opportunity to speak to people and look them in the eye. And every leader tries to, even if you talked about intent in the military and how we do a pretty good job of that. We try to do a good job of that, and it might not be that way in other organizations, but that's where followership comes in. So those folks who are sitting at the table, if you don't understand what it is you're being asked to do or what the objective or the goal that you're trying to reach, it is incumbent upon you to ask the questions. Let me just see if I understand you correctly. This is what you're trying to do, right? Asking those questions, those reforming questions, to really hone in on what it is they're looking for, because that's the opportunity to do it. And a lot of folks will feel that they don't want to speak in those situations, and they don't want to come off as not understanding what's been said for many reasons. But if you don't ask those questions and refine that guidance, then you go off flapping and you're just trying to guess, and that's a bad spot to be in. You have to ask those questions, refine. And you know what? It's good for the leader. It's good for the person who's giving that intent, because oftentimes these things are coming in so quickly that they may be giving intent on multiple different fronts about multiple different issues. So it helps them refine their guidance and their own thinking on the topic. I think it's so important. You have to speak up if you don't clearly understand.
Yeah, I love two things that you just said there. First, refining what it is, like really diving into it and clarifying. But you said reforming thoughts, and so these are things that are just taking what it is that we're looking and sort of changing it and molding it down to what we're asking for. Asking those detailed questions is not a bad thing to a commander, even in the military, but especially in the civil. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Boom. Like now I'm really diving in and trying to do that. And why that's so important is if we're going to walk out of this room, you're going to be leading other people, and you want to make sure you know exactly what we're talking about. And as a leader, I know I would be like, yes, good. Let me clarify on that. Or no, you got exactly right. And we're diving down. And I think that is so critical. The followership that you're talking about is you can't effectively lead unless you effectively follow and understand what's going on. If I can, I'd really like to focus in on this part. And I think you are the person to talk to. So when you're in with a boss who has a million things going on, how in the world do you start to think for a boss like that? How do you start to know what they think, and then versus what they say they want and what they really need? Like, how do you start thinking for a boss like that?
This is a topic I love because it's something I take great pride in. I learned when I got to Joint Special Operations Command, when I really started working directly with some general officers, and then on to Congress, when I was working with a member of Congress. You're expected to write correspondence on their behalf. They're busy people, right? They expect their staffs to write correspondence, to write emails, to communicate their words and their intent to other people, to include amongst other senior leaders. If you're in a room with them, you have to be speaking on their behalf at any time. So this is something that I've honed in on, and I really, really think it's important in these. And the first thing I do is I listen to language. All right, when I'm in a room with the principal or a senior military official, whoever, I listen to the words they're speaking. And I listen to those words, and I listen to how they talk to their subordinates. I listen to how they talk to their superiors. I listen to how they talk to their peers. And when you're really honing in on this, you'll start to see themes emerge about the topics they care about, what they think about those topics, and where they want to go with those topics. And the same thing when it comes to written correspondence. When you're looking at their emails and you're looking at their emails back and forth with the same groups of people, you look at the language they use, even their own little colloquialisms, like how they phrase things differently, because each leader has their own way of phrasing things and the way they talk to people. Some email very, very formal emails. Others are very informal in their emails. And you have to look at all these aspects of language and communication. And I think it's something that we're kind of losing right now, is honing in on those skills, especially as we communicate more in a condensed manner with text and emojis and all the things we do to try to take that language down. But it's so important. And once you've done that, once you've gotten that done, and you'll start to flesh out what really matters to them and how they talk it and how they want to get at it. And then as you're writing for them or preparing correspondence for them, you start incorporating all that into it. And your goal ultimately is to get back a product that you've written on behalf of somebody else, and it's just clean. There's no red marks. And when you get to that point, you're there. I've written op-eds for senior leaders where I got to the point, I handed the op-ed, they looked at it, they handed it back, say, publish that. And you got it. And that's so important when you're working with senior leaders and you're in their staff, because they expect you to be like that.
Yeah. Okay. So there's so much to that. hat off to you for figuring out how to listen and the process that you go to. I had not thought, all right, if I listen to how people talk to superiors, their peers, and subordinates, and look for the same colloquialisms that they're using, I'm going to quickly figure out not only what they think, but how they're trying to, and I'll use the word market, but communicate and direct and get that information out so that they can obtain the objective that they're trying to, or the intent that they're trying to. Um, Man, that's going to take time, but yes, if you're in it and you start learning that, but that's such a bigger skill than just knowing how to think for your boss, knowing how to think for people, and just listening to everyone as they're going through. You start listening to body language and listening to the communication, and you see emotion versus reality versus what are they saying versus what do they want, and things like that. So where did you learn that?
I don't think there's no formal training for this. There's no, at least I never received any. I'm sure there are verbal, nonverbal cues courses out there to learn about people's communication. Really, it was just out of necessity. When I was at Joint Special Operations Command, you go in there and you have to write for a lot of different general officers, communicating to a lot of other general officers. Everything from their emails, like knowing what font color and what font size they use, right? Because you're writing emails and correspondence for them to send to other people. And it's just, you have to learn it. That's how I got thrown into that deep end, is you just had to learn it. And I figured out pretty quickly that it was a skill that I had. And, as I'm navigating through this, I started getting less and less to zero feedback on the correspondence that I would write for folks, because I understood their manner of speaking, how they write emails and how they communicate, what the larger mission intent is. So it's not just knowing them, it's knowing the information on the outside, like what's going on in the different areas of the world that we're focusing on. And so it's taking that operational knowledge along with the knowledge of the leader and putting those two things together and synthesizing it to put out a product that allows them to easily communicate with other senior leaders and handle the many things that they have to handle in a day.
I think that's funny because JSOC is a place where you get very little training, and your expectation of being the expert on day one is there. You are consistently and constantly thrown into the fire. So I completely see where that is. But my task to you is write the training program, write the book. Everybody will buy it. That's a huge skill that you have.
It's not a bad idea. I might have to think about that.
All right. So you are doing a lot right now, obviously in the military, doing God's work, just informing and working with the congressional staff. What else are you learning right now? What else are you doing?
I'm doing a lot of stuff on the outside of the military. I've been very involved in veterans issues here in the county I live in. I'm the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Commission in Calvert County, Maryland, where I live.
Okay.
And that's taken me all across the state and within the local and state governments. And I think it's been a great learning experience for me. I'm really passionate about good governance. I'm really passionate about the American system. And the American system of government is, the workings between those different levels, between the federal, the state, and the local level. It's always been that way, and it was set up that way. And I've learned so much about state and local governments in the last couple of years, and it really has driven an interest in me, because too often we're in our smartphones and all we see on the news is what's going on in Washington, D.C. And we think that Washington, D.C. should be handling all of our problems. But all the while, there's this local government here that's allocating money for public safety, for your schools, for the pipes that run underneath your home, all these things that are actually mattering in your day-to-day life. And we tend to ignore those things. So I've been paying much more attention to those things. I keep telling people, when it comes to elections, the farther up the ballot you go, the farther you are from your front door. So look at those things. And I've been really enjoying learning about that kind of stuff. Nonprofits. All of a sudden, I'm like involved in these nonprofits and how that works. So some of them are veteran oriented. I work with Surf Brigade, which was started by another TAC-P, Kevin Laliberte, who is trying to help veterans through surf therapy, but not like an outdoor excursion type of, gain connections by doing something, but it's really a clinically proven program. It's more than just go out and surf. So that's been great. Giving back to veterans within the hospice of the Chesapeake here in Maryland, doing a lot of that type of nonprofit work and learning about that. My wife's involved in a nonprofit, so out of nowhere, this just kind of popped up, and altogether, just lifelong learning. I would say everybody needs to be doing it, and it doesn't matter what it is. I'll tell you that much. If it's local government, if it's a nonprofit, if it's learning how to speak a language, playing an instrument, fixing cars, I don't care. Find something to learn always. If you're getting stagnant in your job, some time, because your job's going to be there. A lot of us don't have the luxury of saying, I could just leave my job now, especially in the military sense, right? You're in that job for some time. Take your time to learn something new, a new skill, read about it, keep that mind flowing, because our mental acuity is a perishable asset. It will diminish. I mean, you and I we're reaching that point where we're going to start working on diminishing returns in our age, right? Like we got to capitalize while we're at it, right? Having this conversation. So that's what I just say to any listener out there: is just keep learning something all the time.
Yeah. No. Just always reading, always thinking. We had Ellie, Kevin Laliberte on here talking about Surf Brigade and what an incredible nonprofit he's doing and just helping people. So I'll put the link down to make sure if you guys are looking to help out a veteran organization. Surf Brigade is incredible. Obviously, Moray Classical is incredible as a sponsor. But I find it sort of ironic and interesting, yet I see it when you go to serve and you go looking for how does the state work and how does the local government work, you're going to just naturally go into nonprofits because it's like-minded people who are trying to do something to help others. And man, I always appreciated you and your vision in that is always helping others. How can I go and serve? And in the military, yes, we're all there to serve, but you can see people who are looking for that and have a desire. So man, I appreciate you in that as we go forward.
It's been thank you for that. It's my faith journey has helped me on that as well. Like when the hospice of the Chesapeake, I figured how could I get into the community and help people at their, some of their lowest, most challenging points. And that's what got me into hospice areas. Like I started as a volunteer to be there at, the bedside, to volunteer to provide, just support and compassion to people who are in their last moments of life and their families. And I felt that was a great place to be at that, one of those most important places where people need help. And where it took me in that organization was that they have an honor salute program for veterans who are on their deathbeds, and to go there in uniform, present them with a certificate, a patriotic quilt, and offer them a salute for their service to our country. And like, I didn't go in for that purpose, but there was a need for it, and I happened to be there at that time. And I believe, I don't believe that was coincidental, and it's been so rewarding for everybody involved. It's a great program, and if anybody's in the Maryland area, happy to give them information.
Gosh, that's fantastic. And what I'll do is I'll drop the link for that in the description as well, where they can go and get information on that. Man, Brendan, that's awesome. All right. Well, unbelievably, it's been 30 minutes. We have just crushed it today. I've learned a ton. And really appreciate you. Before we get going, though, I just want to pass it back to you. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to tell these young leaders?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. Yesterday, as I was preparing for this, I got back my theory evaluations from my TAC-P vectoring board. They'd been out for a while, but I hadn't gotten them yet, and I finally was able to read through what people thought about me and my leadership and the organization. And there was great feedback, lots of compliments, very humbling experience to see that. But there was some people out there who took the time to provide some feedback, and it was critical. And one thing I'll tell to every leader out there is take a time every day, if you can, for self-reflection. Okay. And it's got to be done and through some sort of foundation that you're kind of viewing life through. So for me, for instance, a daily reflection through the eyes of my faith is something, a reflection of conscience, an examination of conscience each day to figure out where I'm at, what am I doing, and how can I be better at that. But this was a perfect tool because, as you're going through your day, you think things are going great, but you don't always see how you're coming off to other people. And
Right.
some of the things in there was, somebody had mentioned like impatience sometimes. And I think that's true and something I need to work on. And as I saw that and reflected upon it, I said, yeah, absolutely. Because for instance, on the ability to read leaders and to get their input and kind of really coalesce things down to that essential point very quickly is a skill I have. And sometimes I can be impatient when I have to explain it over and over and over again to someone else. Yeah. And that's something I need to work on. And I started thinking about my son, Gavin, who, I might have this skill, but I don't have any mechanical skill at all. I'm horrible at it. My son, Gavin, my oldest son, he's 23. He's always had it. And he's always had patience when he's helping me put things together or do things that I'm not inclined to. So I really started thinking about, I could really take a lesson from my son on how to be patient with people and be a better leader to boot and have a better thriving organization. But that self-reflection is key, I think, for everybody. And it's going to be different for everybody. That's what it's so important. But you have to take stock of who you are, your interactions of what you're doing each and every day, and always try to strive to be better, a better person just generally, and to help people.
Man. Yeah. 100%. That's awesome. And something we don't do enough. So really, really appreciate you sharing that. So appreciate your time. I know you're busy. I can't imagine all the things that you have. So just carving out some time for me was huge. Well, Dr. Temple, appreciate you. Appreciate you serving our country in both the military and on the political side. And from Brandon and I, this is TUC0's Wright checking off.